Ladies and gentlemen, conference, thank you for listening to me. If 30 years ago my mother had known that on the eve of Maastricht I would share a platform with Nigel Farage and Anne Widdecombe, her heart attack would have come a lot quicker than it did. Conference, the world is a mirror which is cracked into hundreds of different directions. Each of them are unpredictable in their shape and are a threat to our values, way of life, and possibly even existence. Yet our leaders sleepwalk towards our enemies. They are naked of armor, and they approach with their weapons sloped. And this party, all of us, are a pale, thin blue line. And it is now the only political force that stands with our armed forces. We stand with their sacrifice, which is symbolized by the tombstones and headstones of young Britons, which are now scattered to rest in far corners of the globe. And we will, as a party, put our country, with its ancient history, first, always. Now, like me, I imagine many of you started life as Conservatives. This country stood for the maintenance of peace and prosperity. We guarded our nation, preserved the peace in Europe, and were willing to fight for the underdogs. But our resources have been steadily over the past decades undermined. And we have now moved past the Chamberlain phase of appeasement. The government wriggles and twists to avoid the hard realities of what's happening in our world. They refuse to listen to the concerns of our senior leadership. And defence has been diminished to the point at where it is now an exquisite shop window, when what we need is the resilience of an Amazon warehouse. Progress has not created an easy world. If science and technology has made our life easier, it has also made it a more dangerous place. It is now more dangerous than even at the end of the Cold War, when stupendous destructive power was kept in place by a dualist, globalist system. That system has now gone, and only the blind can ignore the expansion of conflict in Europe, the hegemonic rise of power in the East, and the many states that lie in between, that have harnessed technology to carve out greater influence or settle old scores. Our leaders, conference, lack vision. And they lack wisdom. They have become technocrats, bureaucrats, and planners, a composite corporate blob where national purpose is discarded for political compromise and local harmony. Our leaders are fumbling with our destiny, and they are gambling with our future. They take the nation's defences for granted. They do their barest minimum to equip them, but will shamelessly, never knowingly miss a photo call when they want to impress their international club of globalist friends. They prefer not to upset the plutocratic bureaucracy which runs the country in their name. They want to keep the status quo and hope problems go away. And ladies and gentlemen, status quo is Latin for the bloody mess we're in at the moment. Now, our nation's forces are our nation's backstop. From insurrection to foreign armies to unwarned threats and those from nature. They are our final guarantor. But listening to the national conversation played out on airwaves between politicians and experts, and the constant murmur of social media which offends our ears, the state of our armed forces and their value barely reaches a whisper. And great risk lies in weakness and appeasement. But this is the spectre that well-meaning liberals of our society put before us. Liberals, those who believe a nation's armed forces are an expensive vanity. Those who believe powerful foreign totalitarian states are someone else's problem. and those that believe the armed forces are there to reflect society, not defend it. Those who believe that the armed forces are there to rescue them from floodwater or are some far-off land refugee collection agency. Those who believe that the armed forces are like spoons in a drawer and you only have to pull them out when they're needed. Ladies and gentlemen, those voices are wrong, wrong, and wrong again. Conference, those voices, those people do not speak for us. And I think we have heard today from excellent speeches that there is a lava flowing and seething beneath the surface of this country. And its people will not let the freedoms we cherish be purchased from us cheaply. There is a point beyond which our opponents and enemies will not advance. So what do? We must have the capacity to take on the bully. I found myself once doing combat survival training in Alaska. It was a cold night, and our instructors joyously told us that the grizzly bears had come out of hibernation and were on the prowl. They preferred the salmon in the rivers, but they might be tempted by a passing trooper who got in their way. As far as they could remember, no trooper had been eaten by a grizzly bear, but they couldn't be sure. Be careful, they said. Don't run. It has your scent. Don't show you're afraid. Don't try to make a noise. Don't try to escape. Don't ever back down. Stand your ground. If it approaches and begins to circle, then tense yourself and follow it round. I'm pretty worried at this stage. If it comes for you, summon all the strength you have and smash it on the nose. Don't miss. If you do that, it will probably go away. And what I mean by relating this small story is that the country must have the means to stand up to bullies, whoever they are and wherever they are. Bullies who use their crude instruments of power to intimidate us to see what we will do. And at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, we do not have that capability. We must stand up for our values and beliefs. The British public know that given leadership, time, and a little bit of hope, they will overcome wrong. And they cannot comprehend why our leaders are shy about standing up for what we all believe in. Winston Churchill said of our enemies, "What kind of people do they think we are?" Well, they found out, didn't they? But it reminds me of the story of an old woman who found herself in the Blitz on the wrong end of a German bomb. She lay amongst the ruins of her East End home, every piece of furniture broken, all her ornaments smashed, and every shed of clothing that she had ever had was in tatters. Barely conscious, a fireman found her. And he also miraculously found a bottle of brandy that hadn't been broken, and he passed it to her lips, at which point she stood up and said with a growl, "Put that away, it's for emergencies." Conference, that's what the British people are. We are stoic, we are stubborn, and we are slow to rise. But once aroused to action, no nation on earth can stand against us. And our armed forces epitomise that spirit, and we should celebrate them, not emasculate them. So, we must strengthen existing alliances, not build new political ones. NATO has protected the European continent for 5 decades. Its role is not over. Yet the civil service obsession in drawing the UK into the EU's orbit with operational engagement and industrial cooperation horribly compromises sensible European defence arrangements. The EU craves our muscle and it craves our industry. Ministers, in their naivety, will let bureaucrats get away with it. Labour, in power, would actively encourage it. Both parties prioritise EU diplomatic bargaining over pragmatic defence planning. No, no, and no. Conference, there is no defence policy or operational merit in closer EU alignment. We must build a defence approach which is unified and works together. But we don't have it. Government sees defence as a diplomatic instrument or as a sticking plaster to cover the latest domestic disaster. The civil service sees a means for EU engagement on their own agenda, while industry sees cash, exploiting short-term procurement decisions to reap increased profit while they can. The grinding of these gears to produce a coherent national defence policy must stop. And what of the progressive liberal world, the liberal disease? The one which is new culture which we are forced to suffer every single day. As if the threats in front of us were not bad enough, we allow liberal diseases to rot within us. It is with the greatest astonishment that history will record how this nation gave up its freedoms, surrendered their society generations have fought for, and gave it over so easily to liberal behaviour and causes, because we weren't prepared to defend our beliefs, because we weren't prepared to defend the warrior culture when we need it. Instead, we are told to be ashamed of it. Ladies and gentlemen, conference, civilizations die when they become too civilized. At the end of a conversation with an Afghan refugee, I told him, we just don't know how lucky we are in this country. I didn't get the reaction I expected. He was astonished. He said, how lucky you are. At least I had somewhere to escape to. Where are you going to go? And in that sentence, he presented the dilemma for this country. If we lose our freedoms, our way of life, and our identity through zealous liberal idealism, there is no place for us to escape to. So what would reform do about restoring the defence capability that this country has? And there are three bold strands that I want to present to you. One, we would create resilient operational capability that can be sustained. There can be no rewriting of British foreign policy. It has actually served us quite well. But Brexit has created new foreign policy dynamics, including a pivot to the Asia-Pacific region. And with that will come new commitments. It must have commands and an organisation that can support foreign policy of this nation wherever that goes in the national interest. 2, reform will undertake defence industrial sector reform. We will no longer tolerate continued equipment cliff edges and will commit to the long-term procurement of those major programmes which are necessary for the defence of this nation. But we will tighten the way procurement is undertaken with the formation of a joint acquisition corps of military and commercial professionals that will provide a stronger bridge between operations, equipment requirements, and the procurement. Let's get rid of some of that waste that we always hear about. Our strategic defence industry itself, with its technology advantage, will be more closely aligned with long-term defence programming. It will remain sovereign. In return, it will receive greater certainty in future requirements and improved incentives to generate valuable exports, which the rest of the world makes use of, but we don't. And 3, we will create people policies and manage them with an organisation that is fit for purpose. Instead of churning through endless recruiting campaigns, we will let in-service incentives for personnel be our recruiting sergeant. Improve welfare, improve terms of service and housing. An educational incentive, including our own inversion of the incredible US GI Bill, which benefited generations of United States generations and wider society. Our veterans will not be allowed to fall into a chasm between government departments, and they will not be administered from the dusty desk at the back of the Cabinet Office with no resources and no authority. As Richard said earlier, reform would establish a new, separate, full ministry that ensures previous service is recognised with a cabinet voice, but a ministry that would also take responsibility for cross-government role in recycling hugely valuable human capital, instead of at the moment where we abandon it at the fringes of society. Now, Conference, these plans will of course cost more money. That's true. But anyone who knows anything about defence knows that successive governments have been dishonest in what protecting our nation, our way of life, and remaining at the world's top table means. No one can say we are safer from conflict and threats today than we were at the end of the Cold War, when our defence budget stood at over 4% of GDP. So a pledge, ladies and gentlemen, for a reform government. Within 6 years of office, Reform UK government would increase defence spending to 3% of GDP. So let me conclude. We are not a party that, entrusted with government, would carelessly send other people's sons and daughters to fight on political whims and hubris, as both Blair and Cameron did. Reform would ensure they have the tools to do the job, to do their work, protecting our way of life and our values. Conference, there is no peace without victory. Those who would trade our way of life for a soup kitchen of liberal accommodation, avoiding confrontation with those that oppose us, believing they will learn to love us, are utopians. They sneer at us, believing we are simpletons without answers to complex questions. But Conference, perhaps some of the answers are simple. Enemies do not tangle with you if they fear you. But if they believe you are physically weak, your will is moribund, and you are morally corrupted, then they will come for you and they will take what you have. Alistair Hamilton was a founding father of the United States, and he said, "A nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is good for a master and deserves one." Ladies and gentlemen, that is not us. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not reform. Please spread the word. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.